But some sort of makeup is nice. Fantasy is nice. And it helps us to get through reality. Reality can sometimes be pretty heavy and hit you in the nose. I like a little false eyelashes and a little titillation. I think it makes life more, you know what I mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Hey, my name is Kandai Kanka and welcome to my channel. I am super excited about what I'm going to introduce to you guys today. If you're slightly confused, because last week I had said nothing about makeup, but here I am, attempted a full beat face and trying to channel like Diane Carroll, everything will be explained in just a minute. The purpose of this episode is to introduce to you a project that's going to drop very soon. And I'm super excited, super nervous. But yeah, before I go into explaining what that project is, bam, we are going to talk about the sociology behind it, the sort of theory that paved the way for me to have this idea, basically. Last week, I was remiss in not defining what sociology is. I have an inkling, though, that like 96% of you know what sociology is. But for the sake of thoroughness, ology means the study of, and socio, of course, means society. So basically, the study of society. And within the study of society, there are two means of examining. There is macro sociology and there's micro sociology. Macro, obviously meaning big, looks to your wider structures, such as government. It looks to things like historical processes, such as colonialization. Did I say that correctly? Colonialization. As well as, your structures, capitalism, patriarchy. So your very big picture things that are happening in society, that influence society, that move society along, that make society function the way it is. So very, very big picture things. Microsociology, on the other hand, micro meaning small, looks at action, looks at interaction between individuals and smaller collectives, as well as the construction of meaning, which is my favorite. It basically looks at everyday life. Something to note with macro and micro sociology is that they're not in conflict and they're not opposites of each other. If anything, they are on a spectrum, or rather like a cycle. Everything big that's happening, government, capitalism, colonialization, is filtered into our everyday lives, as you would know. And all the decisions that we believe are individual decisions that we make, how we interact, things in our everyday spaces in society also reinforce the larger structures. So if anything, they're not opposite, they kind of like just feed into each other. And I think it was feminists, probably Audre Lorde, but don't hold me to that, but I think it was Audre Lorde who said the personal is political. And that's basically it. That's basically the theory of macro sociology, right? Is the personal is political and the political is personal. You can't necessarily separate the two from each other. It's just an easy way that I guess people that study sociology want to separate, like, I'm going to look at big things, you're going to look at small things. But at the end of the day, you could be looking at the same thing, just depending on, like, are you using big glasses or smaller glasses? Yeah. So for the purposes of this episode, we're looking specifically at micro sociology. And micro sociology is nice because it feels accessible. If you talk things like government, if you talk things like capitalism and patriarchy, they can be very big things, but you have to bring them sort of into a context which is relatable, and that's what microsociology does. And we're going to be looking at microsociology and a specific theorist called Erving Goffman. Eventually on this channel, I'd like to introduce you guys to Black sociologists, specifically women Black sociologists like Patricia Hill Collins, Kimberly Crenshaw, However, as you know, the white man kind of hogs a lot of spaces. So today we're looking at a white man, Erving Goffman, and we're looking at his theories around stigma. Now, stigma is one of those things that is in our society, and everyone has like an inkling of what it is. Everyone has a gist of what stigma is. You might not have the exact words to describe it, but more or less you know what it is. I, in fact, wrote a poem called What Does a 5-Year-Old Know About Antiretrovirals? And in that poem, there's a line that says, what does she know about stigma? Except that it sounds like a sting that make others allergic to a type of me. Come on, y'all. That was deep and sad. But deep and sad. You guys must really check out my poetry on my Instagram. But I'm going to give you Erving Goffman's exact definition. And he says, looking at my notes now, he says, stigma is an attribute that can be deeply discrediting, which reduces whole persons to tainted or discounted others. I'm going to say that again. Stigma is an attribute that can be deeply discrediting and can reduce whole persons to tainted or discredited others. So it has to do with an attribute. It has to do with something that somebody has that reduces that person to less than, or others that person suddenly renders that person is like, that person is not normal anymore. They fall into a different category, and that category is not a category of like normal whole human beings, which is very harsh. But that's what stigma does. It puts people aside and says, you're not a whole human being. You are to be discredited, basically. And we're going to be saying the word discredited quite a lot. He then elaborated on this definition of stigma, which is a good thing. And he said that stigma has to do with the relationship between the attributes and the audience. Now, if there's anything you're going to pick up from this little mini sociological lesson or sociological teaching is what I'm about to explain now. Based on the first definition, he made it very much about the attribute. You have an attribute that just discredits you, makes you less than whole, puts you aside. He clarified and said, actually, it's not the attribute that creates the stigma. It is the relationship between that attribute and how an audience receives or processes that attribute that makes the stigma. So let's take, for example, an addict. Addiction is an attribute on somebody that often discredits them. We discredit addicts. We don't consider them full human beings capable of making decisions, and we other them, right? That person can never be me. I don't hang out with addicts, yada, 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 right? But that stigma is coming about because a particular audience has read that attribute in a certain way. Because they've recognized addiction on somebody, they have then stigmatized that person. In another context, with another audience, an addict would not be stigmatized. So, for example, in rehab, an addict in rehab amongst other addicts or amongst people that counselors that help them with their addiction, right, who understand addiction, would not stigmatize, would not discredit this person, would not consider this person less than whole, and therefore the stigma does not exist. And I think this is an important take because often when we talk about stigma, a lot is put on the attribute, a lot is put on the thing that supposedly makes people, that supposedly creates the stigma, or that supposedly is the stigmatizing thing, right? So if it's a disease, if it's addiction, if it's somebody's race, a lot is put onto that attribute because this person is sick, and therefore they can't do all these holistic human stuff and can't be included into society. And often you can't actually change the attribute. If someone is black, you can't change that they're black. If somebody is HIV positive, unless a cure comes around, you can't change that they're HIV positive. What can be changed, however, is how an audience receives and processes the attribute. And in an audience which receives and processes the attribute in a way that is not discrediting, in a way that doesn't say this person is less than whole, then stigma can be eradicated. So it's not enough for somebody to be HIV positive, to be an addict, to be whatever it is, for stigma to exist. There also has to be an audience there that is saying, like, this person is not it. And we can only often change the audience. And I think that's a very important take. It might seem like an obvious take, but I feel like the way that we still go about stigmatizing people, and the way we go about even eradicating stigma sometimes, is putting a lot of burden on those who have whatever the stigmatizing attribute is to change the stigma, rather than putting it on the audience who do have the power to recalibrate their processing and the way that they receive stuff. Yeah, that's like a little rant, but an important rant for the purposes that we are going through. So in the stigma, Goffman had 3 types of stigma. He had abominations of the body, which is so abominations of the body. That is so terrible to say, but this is stigma that has to do with, the physical body, genetic deformities, scars. So basically anything that has to do with the body would fall under this abominations of the body stigma. Then there's blemishes to character, and that is where addicts would fall into, ex-cons would fall into, people that we consider deviants. So we stigmatize people on the basis of the fact that we think that their character deems them less than human. There's something about their character or the choices and decisions that they made that deem them less than human. Then the last sort of stigma that you have is tribal, and this has to do with group affiliation. So this is race, religion, any sort of group of, if you stigmatize because you are affiliated with a particular group, that would fall into that stigma. I'm not going to get into all 3 of them because for the purposes of this video, we're just looking at abominations of the body. We're just looking at the body because that is where chronic illness would fall into. To some extent, if you are somebody with an illness, there is a level of stigma that you're going to experience. Of course, this varies. To paraphrase Animal Farm, all diseases are stigmatizing, but some diseases are way more stigmatizing, right? But still, just because you have a particular illness sometimes can put you out of the norm, right? Especially if you consider that we're living in a society where we are so, I don't want to say health conscious, because there's nothing wrong with being health conscious, but there's a narrative that is built around health that makes it a very individual thing, that makes it seem like it's the normal thing to be that person that is going to gym every single day, who is eating plant-based food, and who never, I don't know. I think you guys know what I'm talking about. There is a huge sort of like health thing around, and it's probably been around for a while, but with social media and everything, is becoming much bigger, which makes it seem like the norm to be a superman, a superwoman, so long as you are on a plant-based diet and are exercising every single day of the week, and so that when people fall sick, when people get sick, it's seen as though that's less than normal, and they must have not been having enough vegetables, they must have not been exercising enough, so other people that are sick, and in a way we sometimes often blame them for their sicknesses because they have not met up to the requirements of what healthy is, if that makes sense. So that's the level of stigma that sometimes people that are sick face. Illnesses are stigmatizing in that way because we consider being healthy the norm, and we consider being sick not the norm. So if you fall out the norm, then you're worthy of being stigmatized. And by no means am I saying that being sick is a good thing. I'm just saying sicknesses are common, and the way in which we often treat them sometimes as being outside of them being a common thing, and sometimes even a natural thing. You go old, and things are bound to happen to your body when you get old. Does not necessarily mean that you are that it's good for people to stigmatize you for that type of thing. That's like my little rant that I'm putting into this episode, and I'm probably going to use that as my excuse for why I did not do any meal prep or exercise this week. Now, another sort of categorization that Goffman did with stigma was he said that there are discredited attributes and discreditable attributes. And what this basically means is that discredited attributes, and we're going to keep it in the context of illnesses or the body. Discredited attributes are things that you can see with your eye, visible, that are visible to the eye. And an easy example of this is somebody on a wheelchair. You see someone on a wheelchair, they automatically, immediately discredited. We've already processed them as this falls outside of the norm. This is not the usual thing. And therefore, a lot of the time, the stigma that they face is immediate and often inescapable, right? People with a discreditable attribute just means that you can't see it with your eye. And many chronic illnesses fall under this because you're not able to see whether somebody is diabetic, whether somebody is HIV positive, or whether somebody has cancer. I mean, of course, until it gets to a certain level, but often you can't see. So the type of stigma that they face sometimes is not necessarily direct. These are not people that are immediately discredited, directly discredited and immediately discredited. And there are people that, for lack of a better word, that are able to pass as normal, though they have an attribute that if people knew about that attribute, they would immediately be discredited. And that's the interesting thing about the discreditable attribute is people with discreditable attributes, and this could be with illness, or this could be people with addictions, or it could be whatever it is, right? If you have something that society would not accept, what you then do is you work very hard not to be found out. And Goffman has a whole other theory about secrets and strategies that people with discreditable attributes utilize in order to navigate society. In fact, it's a very interesting theory because it just doesn't look at stigmas, but it just looks at us as human beings, how society needs secrets and strategies often for us to function, to navigate it, so that we are not found out about something. Because if we were found out, then we'll be discredited, we'll be othered. And once we're othered, that's not a nice life to live, to be living in the margins of society. It's not a great place to be. Now, finally, after all that sociology, we get to the crux of this video. I am introducing a project called Sick Faces. And sick, obviously playing with that, sick as in chronic illness, but sick as in like dope, as in like cool, as in like slang. Sick Faces is a project that conceptualizes chronic illness into makeup looks. That's it in a nutshell. Chronic illness into makeup looks. And this is where the sociology comes in. Because when you did the call out for Sick Faces, I specifically asked for participants who had chronic illnesses that were not visible to the eye, aka discreditable attributes. And that's partly because I was so interested in how they navigate their illness or this attribute which could potentially discredit them in society. Like, what is the experience of it? What are the internalizations that they take in from society about their illness? So the outside perceptions of society and about their illness, how do they perceive those? And then how does the experience influence the way they perceive their own illness? And ultimately putting that into a look. So it was working with an internal to external kind of exploration of somebody's chronic illness. The practical reason why it had to be a discreditable attribute, an attribute that you cannot see with your eye, is because we're working with makeup. We were trying to work with illnesses that generally don't have a face. So with many chronic illnesses, you can't tell that somebody has it up until maybe it gets to a particular stage. So in conceptualizing this, we're asking via your perceptions and your experiences and everything that you know about this illness and how you live this illness, what face would you give to your illness? So that was the practical reason why it had to be a discreditable attribute. It was such a fun endeavor. It was so endearing and profound. And a lot of the times I realized that there's not a lot of space that's given to talk about chronic illness unless it's in the doctor's room, the hospital, or we're only talking about illnesses when it's an emergency situation, when it's a bad situation, when it's not fun to talk about illness is when we talk about illness. But this was a fun situation, and I really, really, really enjoyed it. And yeah, I don't want to give too much away. I'm trying not to give too much away. What I will say is that I had an expectation of the type of looks that were going to come from this project, and I was absolutely baffled by the other looks that people chose. And the makeup looks were very collaborative. So it wasn't us saying, like, if someone came with their particular illness, it wasn't saying like, okay, well, we're going to give you this look. It was a very collaborative process. And this is where my best friend Sancha came in, amazing makeup artist. And she kind of took all the ideas. The participants sent like maybe 3 or 4 photos, said, this is what we foresee, what the face for my illness would look like. And she took that and she consolidated it into one makeup look. And the looks that we did, I absolutely did not anticipate that those are the looks that were going to come out. You know, which is interesting. And like I said, I don't want to give away too much. So probably after the project, I'll tell you what my expectations were and how they were not met or met. I have a couple of acknowledgements that I have to make. Thank you to Pastor Tito, Pastor Peter, and Aunt Sandy. They were able to give us a venue that was accessible to the participants, as well as a venue that adhered to all the COVID restrictions. I don't know if that's how you say it, but it was a venue that did the sanitizing, the temperatures, the social distance. I was very particular about that. So we're very happy to have gotten that venue. I also definitely want to thank our participants, because number one, just coming and talking about your illness is not an easy thing, no matter what people think. Then two, to do it at a time where we, like in the middle of a pandemic, you know, to still be willing to be like, yo, I would like to come out and actually talk to you about the story. We were very careful, but we're still very grateful that people came along. And there were some participants that did not come, and that is understandable. Some participants who were like, no, I want to tell my story. I can't make it there, but this is what I want to share. Thank you to those people as well so much. Then I definitely want to thank Sancha. Thank you so much, Sanchi. You did such a great job with the makeup looks. Just did such a great job being a collaborator to me, because I'm like all over the place. Thank you so much. And then I want to thank you guys in advance for watching. Please watch. And thank you for watching when you eventually do, because I'm so interested to find out what you guys think, not just about the illness, but whatever sort of comes in your head via other people's stories. Comment about your own illnesses if you'd like. If you're someone who likes makeup and has a chronic illness and you'd like to take, a try at conceptualizing a face for your own chronic illness, please go ahead and then tag Sick Faces and tag me and Sancha on it, because it would be so interested for people to participate in this. I hope I've explained it well, but I'm super excited. It should be dropping super soon, so look out for that. If you are excited for Sick Faces, please drop a comment. If there's a comment that you want to say about Erving Goffman, or anything that I've said about stigma, anything you don't understand, anything that you understand so well, you just want to share it, whatever the case, comment, like, subscribe. Thank you so much for tuning in. I see that I have 12 subscribers, and I feel so blessed, because Jesus only needed 12. He only needed 12 to change the world. So I'm so happy for those who've already subscribed, those who watched the other episode, those who are watching this current episode. I cannot express to you how grateful I am to do this and to have any sort of support. So thank you very much. So yeah, you came, you saw, contact.